Hello and welcome to Stephen University. This week on our Hiatus Watch, we are taking a look at the thing Chris suggested in passing and I dismissed, and then I got an amazing email that just basically called me a... I can't remember what it was. It was just like, suck it up, dickhead, was basically the... the premise. Those were not the words, but that was the
I think it said something like, rank the gems, you coward.
It was pretty much something along those lines. Should I try and find it? Because the person should get credit, actually. That's fair. Because there had been one or two passing comments, but no one seemed particularly passionate about it. Most people didn't seem to care whether I wanted to rank the gems or not. And I was like, well, that's proof. That's proved my theory that no one really is that fussed. And then we got this email, and it was glorious. It was a really good. It was just, there you go. Rank the gems, you coward. For fuck's sake, Dan. It was from...
But what I love is, I realised when I came to do this, so we, last week, set the parameter that we would rank the crystal gems. At some point we will do townies, but we will rank the crystal gems, and we will rank them we will define that as anyone that fought in the battle at the end of Reunited. Therefore, we would count
with the
Connie, but not...
Oh, no, I thought we landed differently.
I thought we landed... That's how I've included Connie as a crystal gem.
I have not. Because I remember
okay,
distinctly you saying that Connie... maybe you said Greg would count as a townie. Shit.
Yeah, I think we said Greg would count as a townie.
Shit, man. I haven't included Connie.
Do you know where you'd slot Connie in?
I don't. It would take... Let me see if I can work it out. Oh, dear, that changes the game, Chris.
That means there's 8, basically, to rank.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've got...
But, well, while you're doing that, what I realised, and we can just miss Connie if you want, I can just tell people where I'd put Connie. But what makes it interesting is I realised we didn't specify favourite or best, which could be two very different things.
Well,
so I've kind of played it as favourite. Is that what you've done?
So, okay, no. You're gonna... So I'm gonna tell you what I've done, Chris, and let's keep in mind your original response to my description, because when you said, rank the gems, and I said I don't think we should do that, it's the sort of shit Homeworld would do, and I think that's in the context of the show, not in the spirit of the show, and you replied, nerd, to which I have gone so nerd, because, Chris, if we're going to objectively do it, then I need a spreadsheet with a point system, which is what I've done. I spent about an hour and a half putting a point system together. You can laugh, right, but the numbers don't lie, Chris. And I got some quite surprising results.
Because I picked up the paper on which I printed the stuff about the flood order and just wrote their names.
I love that is the definition of our different approaches to this.
But I did do two lists, one favourite, and then I thought, oh shit, did we mean favourite or best? And I've kind of done it again as best, but there's more.
I've done it. I think I've lent towards best in terms of my scoring system. But one thing that somebody pointed out to me today, and one of the other reasons I didn't include Connie, was that the categories, they were like, well, if you're doing antagonistic versus protagonistic, then it gets very mucky because there have been episodes when good gems have been the bad gems and vice versa, and it all gets a bit muddled. So I was like, well, if we do these again, the category should be crystal gems, humans, in which I assumed Connie would be, because that sort of covers Greg as well, because I don't know if you count Greg as a townie. Then you'd have homeworld gems, and then what was the final category? So it was crystal gems, homeworld gems, humans.
I mean, one big thing I'm picking up is that, you and I have got a little bit obsessed with a bad Channel 4 reality TV series called The Circle. And maybe we should have spent a little less time today talking about The Circle and a bit more time clarifying what we meant.
Yeah, that's true.
When we said rank the gems.
We were so vague. Well, it's fine, because I think we've both roughly done the same thing, because I've ended up leaning towards best. But I've got 4 categories I've scored them each in. So how I've done it is I've got 4 categories, and I've ranked them in each category. So 7 through 1. Because I've only got 7.
You're going to read out your rankings for each category? You've then amalgamated that, I take it, into a...
So how I worked out this final score is they each got an average of their scores, and the lowest score means they were the furthest down towards number 1 on the list the most often. Does that make sense? So, like...
Yeah.
Like, unfortunately, in the categories, Bismuth did not do well. Bismuth struggled. I'm not going to lie. And ended up very high up the list because the average scores were quite high. So I did have a tie. I had a tie for second and third. So that was when I threw personal preference in over the scoring.
Well, I will kind of read both throughout because, to be honest with you, my best and favourite actually only 5, 4, and 3 are different. And so it's the same 3 names in sixth. No, in 5th, 4th, and 3rd place. The order's just slightly different. But in both my favourite and best, 8 and 7 and 1 and 2 are exactly the same. So let's just start with 8 then. So I'm pretty sure we've both got Bismuth.
For me, it's 7. But yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure we've both got Bismuth last.
Final category, fusions.
Okay, so what are your categories again, actually? Let's make that clear.
Crystal gems, humans, homeworld gems, and fusions. The reason Garnet is in here is because I think 90% of she is a perma fusion. You could argue she can show up on both lists, but you can't remove her from this list. And I don't think you can. And equally, I don't think you can include Ruby and Sapphire on this list because while technically they are crystal gems, they are mostly a crystal gem when they are in the form of Garnet.
Yeah, I judged them. And it is slightly...
When they were separate individual people, they were working on Homeworld side. They became Garnet and moved over to the Crystal Gem side, the Rebellion side. So I feel like it's...
But I did think about Ruby and Sapphire as judging Garnet. I did also think about Ruby and Sapphire when judging Garnet. But I don't think
I did too.
Garnet is their relationship. So
I agree.
Okay, so what are your those are the categories you think we're going to rank at some point.
Yes.
What are the subcategories of the ranking for
the
this
points
then,
for my point system? So I went for their group dynamic, so how they work within the group. So they're like, do they add to the group dynamic, or are they hitting on the same note as someone else? That sort of thing. The general entertainment value of the character within the show, just how much I enjoy watching them. The badassery, which is just, I mean, we know where that goes. And then their arc, which was the hardest one to rank. So this was judging their actual growth throughout the show. And like, that one is unfortunate because it is unfairly weighted towards the characters that have been present more often. But I think that's really important because they've all had some really interesting arcs. And I don't think there are bad arcs, but some have surpassed others, which is why it's ended up being scored the way it has.
Okay. So, here we go, guys. I thought with my heart. Dan thought with a spreadsheet. Either way, Bismuth is in 8th place, yeah?
Yeah, Bismuth's last. Yeah, Bismuth
I feel really bad about that.
I love the character, but wait, look, in the group, but we haven't seen her enough in the group to know what her group dynamic is going to be. Her entertainment value is mostly okay because of puns at this point. Like, there've been a few very dramatic moments, but like it is most, that is that her dramatic moments don't outweigh any of the other characters' dramatic moments for a start.
Yeah.
And she's not the funniest character either. Badassery she scores better on for me. Like, that's where she gained a bit of traction, but it wasn't enough to counter the fact she was doing so badly in the other ones. And her arc has been very thin because she hasn't had much screen time to develop it. I am sure if you ask me this question, several episodes from now, I may have a very different question. Maybe a very different answer. But at the moment, her arc is kind of thin compared to the others.
I don't know for sure that you would, because I didn't realise until having to do this how hard it would be. I didn't realise how much I actually love all the characters.
Yeah,
I adore Bismuth. There is no... Just the lower half of this list is full of some of my favourite characters. I was shocked when I looked at my final list and I kind of went,
me too.
Oh, okay. But fundamentally, love all of them. Bismuth, it just comes down to screen time. I actually think what they've done with her, if you were doing all the characters, I would rank her a lot higher than other characters we've seen more. But when it comes to comparing her against these guys... She's had less screen time, although she's been awesome,
she's
fundamentally
been sort of screwed over by her status as being like because if she'd have fallen into one of the other categories, she'd have probably been ranked very high.
But she fights in that battles, and I think it would have been. That's the other thing. She's only really had like 3 appearances, but it would have felt mean to not include her as a crystal gem because I think of her as a crystal gem. For those curious, just to avoid asking it in the comments, we are going to take her out. But Connie actually came 7th in both lists for me. I think Connie's amazing, but when I thought about Connie, I was like, oh, some of my favourite Connie stuff is with Steven. And I thought about, how would I feel if the next episode was a Connie solo episode?
Yeah, I don't think she'd be very high on mine looking at it because her group dynamic, her relationship with the other gems, and her way she interacts with them when she's on her own isn't as engaging as like the way what happens when you put Peridot amongst the crystal gems, for example. Her entertainment value, again, how much I enjoy watching her. Her best stuff is with Steven, like you said. Badassery, she'd be scoring very high, which would be maybe how she gains some traction.
High.
The arc,
she's one of the
journey,
biggest badasses in the show.
Her arc is also pretty good, but again, not comparable to some of the others we've got. So she wouldn't have scored too highly for me. But before we go any further, Chris,
where she was for me.
I don't think she'd be too far off there for me either. I just want to before we go any further, Chris, I feel like it's relevant to put this out there now. Bianca on the Discord this morning puts rank the gems hype. If Lapis isn't topping Chris's list, I'm dropping this podcast. Hashtag CuteBlue1 2018. Just point that out there because I'm sure, Chris, of course, you have put her first, and not at all have absolutely screwed over your personal favourite in the light of logic. And I'm sure you're not going to be upsetting someone. So who's next, Chris, on your list?
Next on my list isn't Lapis, but I will tell you. But I will tell you, I'll pre-warn you now. I'll repeat again. I was surprised when I looked at my final list.
I was too.
I was very surprised.
I'm so sorry. I think I just accidentally kicked my cat in the face.
You're now bottom of my list.
Let me just check. Let me just
because you're a monster.
The cat's okay. Oh, the cat just looks confused. He's fine. Oh, now he's come up to be petted. Okay, that's fine. The cat is fine. It was very light, but I stretched my foot out and didn't realise the cat had been sort of sleeping at my feet. I think I connected with the cat's chin, as it were. Amazing. Anyway, carry on.
My 6th place. The only person here I'm upsetting, Dan, is you. In 6th place, I've got Peridot.
Yeah, well, now that is interesting. Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but because I was also surprised with where that character had to go. What was your reasoning?
So my reasoning for Peridot in 6th was, again, it's kind of these early ones are kind of when comparing against the others. I, again, love Peridot. I think Peridot's arc has been fantastic. I think the evolution of the character has been brilliant. I think she is, as she's been described before, in many ways, the true Green Ranger. She's naturally not had as much time with everyone or got arguably as much depth as the crystal gems that we've spent a lot of time with and who are so tied to the history and mythology of the show. So it kind of naturally ends up becoming a bit Peridot versus Lapis and some of the others. And I think Lapis's arc and depth and, again, my excitement for an episode dedicated just to the character came into play here. And with Peridot, if you said to me, there's a Peridot episode, I'd immediately probably go, oh, cool. Who are they pairing Peridot up with? Are they pairing her up with Steven? That's always fun. Are they pairing her up with Pearl? Cool. Awesome. Lapis, I could do an episode just exploring Lapis. I'm not saying Lapis is next, by the way, but obviously the crystal gems have a lot more weight to them. So although Peridot is one of my personal, well, I suppose this is what this ranking is, so maybe she's not. I adore Peridot, but I just, again, wouldn't be as excited to get a solo Peridot adventure. And actually, if you were to say to me, what more could you explore with Peridot? I'd kind of go, well, I guess her relationship with Amethyst or Lapis, and again, that becomes about her interactions with other character. I can't think personally of many attributes or areas to explore with Peridot that haven't already been explored or don't require her to be interacting with another gem.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable and well put argument.
Cool.
We'll come to my equivalent to that debate in a minute, but in my 6th place, I actually was disappointed to see that I had to put, and the numbers don't lie, Chris. That's going to be my quote of the day. The numbers don't lie, because I ranked them all. Can I just say, in all those categories, I didn't know, I wasn't looking at the average. I couldn't see that. I hadn't put that column in yet with the formula to sort of work out the average. So as I was scoring them, I was scoring them completely in each category versus each other without thinking of the other stuff. Lapis.
Ugh. Well, the numbers lie, don't they, Dad?
No.
Well, I get that. What's your logic?
So she scores very high in badassery. But when it comes to group dynamic, she was very unwilling for most of the shows we're on to engage with any of the group stuff. And when it comes to like entertainment value, but by not engaging with the group, she's not the most fun character to watch. Sometimes she's often the one. She doesn't bring the most to the interactions. On screen, like her entertainment value comes out of the drama, I suppose, rather than the fun, and that obviously is more covered by the arc category of this. Sadly, though, when it comes to the arc stuff, I found it really difficult because while her arc is one of my favourites, when you compare it to the others, all of a sudden it's like you look at Steven's whole growth across the show, Amethyst learning to accept herself, Pearl getting over Rose, Garnet basically becoming a symbol for love. It's really hard, despite that turn and the satisfaction I felt in the moment when Lapis came back and helped them. Even that couldn't rank that high, the arc, because even though it is a brilliant arc, when you stand it next to, she's almost suffering the same way Bismuth is. When you stand her next to Steven, Amethyst, Garnet, and Pearl, she struggles. So yeah, she's come lower for me than I was hoping.
Weirdly, though, I think that's due to time on screen. I don't think that's due to the depth or the story of the arc. Because actually, I think it's one of the most layered and interesting 100%. Arcs out there. But there's just maybe been less time. Like, for example...
Definitely. Time dedicated to it.
I kind of think it's potentially more interesting than Amethyst's backstory, but Amethyst's backstory's had more time dedicated to it.
And it's worth noting that when I said that there is a flaw, I said at the beginning that there is a slight flaw to this, which is that the arc journey category is heavily influenced by how much time each character has had to have their arc developed. But I do feel that when you look at the other categories, she's ranks high on badassery, second in fact for badassery, but entertainment and value and group dynamic, because entertainment value is slightly misnamed. Really, it's a bit confusing to call it entertainment value. I suppose it's like fun factor. You could look at it as to make that a little bit clearer. But yeah, she ends up scoring quite low. So yeah, Lapis not as high as I would have liked. If you'd have asked me to just like throw the names on a piece of paper, I would have imagined Lapis going quite high. But once you actually laid it out, not so much. Who do you have as number 5?
Well, hold on. Well, I went first last time, Dan.
Oh, is it?
So am I just going first? Yeah, you go. No, actually, no. We'll keep it consistent for anyone following along. Okay, so is this the point, Dan? So my favourite and my best are very different answers for this. So I'll give you my favourite because I think it'll be more controversial. So when I ranked it in terms of best gems, I put this character third. But when I ranked it in terms of favourite gems, I put Pearl fifth.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So Pearl's fifth.
Pearl on my list of favourites is fifth. On my list of best, because I think she ranks higher on best because I think the fact that she goes against her programming and she is no longer a Pearl, although she kind of is to some degrees always dedicated to Pink Diamond. Actually, she rebelled against Homeworld. She's her own character. She's her own person. She's hopefully getting cute girls' numbers. because of that, I think it's awesome, and I ranked her very highly on my best. In terms of personal favourites, she, in some ways, her nature sometimes, the way she was with Connie in the training, the way she's been with Stephen, fundamentally she has kept this secret kind of hidden. She can be really harsh to Greg. I get why. I get all of that. But some of those traits, when I was just looking at the names and thinking about who I wanted to spend time with, I was surprised to see. And again, this isn't me shitting on Pearl. This is just comparatively to the others. She ended up 5th.
Yeah. That makes sense though. Like, perfect sense. Yeah, it's not logic I can really thoroughly disagree with because we'll get to it in a minute. But I think I think your logic is really sound, and I think anyone would have a hard time disputing you on that. On my list, 5th, I was absolutely devastated. But again, Chris, the numbers do not lie. Peridot. And I tell you why. She scored the highest on entertainment value. She's the character I most like seeing just sort of do anything, because I just like watching her interact with everything in the world. Like, she is just like, I do. If you're talking about just putting someone in a room, I suppose actually maybe that's the way we need to look at entertainment value. Like, who on their own, just like shove them in a situation, and I'm most just like, I would like to watch you just do things, like just like see how you interact with the universe. Peridot was number 1 for that, so she gained a lot there. She loses massively on badassery because she is not badass in any way, shape, or form. Well.
Can I interject?
You can
throw something out there. Yes, in terms of action, arguably, but fundamentally, she told Homeworld to go stuff it. She switched alliances and rebelled in a way that in a way that the others also did, but we have seen her do that, and she could have hunted for a route back to Homeworld. She's not rebelled for love. She's not rebelled out of circumstance. That's pretty badass.
Let me ask you a question though, Chris. Is that more badass than Garnet?
Okay, yeah.
Is it more badass than Amethyst? Is it more badass than Pearl, who, despite being very mummy and very, like, maternal, will kick ass?
Oh, is also a wicked soldier, yeah.
Is it more badass than Bismuth, who literally sits in lava? Or more badass than Lapis in the sky, wings afloat, launching a fucking barn at a diamond?
As Dumbledore says, Dan, it takes a lot to go against your friends. So I think if Neville can get badass points, I think she's more badass than Bismuth. I'd have ranked her above Bismuth for badass.
Well, Bismuth actually ranked surprisingly high for badassery. Well, okay, so the actual scoring on this one was Peridot came last for badassery, then Stephen came 6th, because Stephen's badassery is more about defense and protecting them, so it's not the same. It doesn't have the oomph to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's had a couple of really great moments where he's been the one to leap forward and save everyone, but like comparatively to the other guys, he's not the most badass, which I think is reasonable.
I'm going to have words to say if that's affected your overall ranking of Stephen, but carry on.
We'll see. We'll get there. So it was Peridot, Stephen, and then the next person down was Bismuth. So Bismuth ranked higher than Stephen and Perry, but no one else, and then everyone else was under Bismuth. With Garnet being number 1, because, come on, it's Garnet. Lapis actually, just surely for throwing a barn at a diamond, Lapis was 2 on the badassery one, because that was just, I can't get that out of my head as an image. It's just so badass. It's awesome. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to forget that moment if I want to.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So unfortunately, Peridot lost most of her points on the badassery, because she's one of the most fun, she has a really good arc, and she does a really good group dynamic. She was either in the middle or very high on all of those, and I think she'd have come like 4th or 3rd had she not lost so many points on badassery. So there you go, Peridot.
Fair enough.
Number 5.
So 4th. So my 4th is Lapis. So it's maybe people expected her to be higher.
Did you hear that, Bianca?
Please don't go.
Please don't leave us. We would be sad.
I mean, it would have been. It would have been nuts to put her above some of the top players, but I was surprised that she was fourth. I really was.
To be fair, you've put her higher than one of the main four, so which considering her screen time is impressive.
So again, so she was fifth in my best. So my best went lapis, amethyst, pearl. Those were the three ways that kind of changed. But the reason she's fourth in my favourites, I can't get her. It's a big part of it is her arc.
Yes,
how she is when she comes back and how awesome she is in Reunited. I felt such. I don't think, and this is another reason she's above Pearl. I love Pearl, but I don't think Pearl has made me cheer and feel things as much as the character of Lapis has. And there's a few instances of that. There's the barn, there's her going away, there's the abusive relationship episode with the boat, which was just stunning.
Yes.
I think the way they've written that character and the way her story unfolded has just been brilliant. And she, like, arguably more than even the people I've ranked higher, because it can't just be about this, although I've said it a few times. She's probably the character more than anyone. If you say, we're going to give you an episode about a gem, who do you want it to be about? If it's just an individual gem and not a pairing, I'm going Lapis. I think there's still so much to explore. It's not all about that, though, hence why she's fourth. I think the reason she doesn't come above some of the others is because, like you say, there's not necessarily the group stuff and the group element. I think if you gave her a love story with someone, whether it should be Peridot or not, is up for debate. But if you gave her like a love story, then I think she would just soar in those ranks. See her fighting for love, not fighting against hate, which is different to fighting for love, that would maybe push her higher.
Yeah.
But in this instance, that's where she ended up for me. So my fourth place is Lapis.
I think Lapis would have been higher for me had I think basically her and Peridot's like arc stories. Like the four main characters, in my opinion, have had the best arc because they've had the most time to develop them. And while I do think Lapis is one of the more complex arcs, I don't think we've had as much time to explore it. Therefore, it doesn't hit as hard, if that makes sense. As satisfying as that moment in Reunited was. But then to what it came down to for me with Lapis specifically was like, was the arc journey. Does she pit Peridot or not, basically? Because I had a fifth and a sixth place to give out in arc, with Bismuth being last and the other four being the front four in terms of arc stuff. And in the end, I just Peridot's redemption arc pipped Lapis's arc for me, only on the basis of there was just something so satisfying about seeing Peridot explore the world and like learn to love Earth, and it was constantly satisfying. Lapis was like, you were confused and you're like, oh, what's she gonna do, and you got invested, and then there's a great payoff at the end. But with Peridot's arc, I felt constant payoff every time she creeped towards loving Earth and being on board with the crystal gems. I got a little explosion of just like, oh, that's nice, like that's excitement, like that's
I get that. I think the argument against that is that the Lapis arc has been more of a long game. I mean, Peridot hasn't. Peridot had nice individual moments, but Peridot doesn't have anything on the notion that Lapis fought a monster under the sea for Earth's
dramatically, the weight of Lapis is
huge.
Yeah.
So my fourth Lapis, your fourth is
my fourth. Drum roll? No, okay, it's Pearl. It's real shame. So. It's really it's a shame because basically she's the mom of the group, so she scores well there. Her badassery, she came third. She scores well there. Her arc, she scores well there. In fact, she got pretty much like consistently came like third, with the exception of she lost a little bit on entertainment value because she's the stuffy one. You do sometimes find that funny when they do a good joke with that, but often she is the voice of like reason, which is good for the group dynamic, which is why she ranks high there, because you need a voice of reason. But it's not great for the entertainment value. You know what I mean? Like, so she's a badass with a great story. I mean, you look at her story arc came third for me because that plot of her getting over Rose and accepting that unrequited love and dealing with that. It's I mean, dear Lord, it's one of the best in the show. And I think
It's Over, isn't it? Is one of the best moments in the show. I've come to realize.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is she came. I ranked her third for that. The only two stories arcs came higher than hers for reasons I'll get to when we get to those two later on. And I do think that it is one of the most powerful stories in the show, and I think. Because I really thought Pearl would be lower in the list, and there was an early version of the list I did when I was like scoring it differently on different categories, where Pearl came much lower, and then I refined it a bit because I was like, these categories don't really work because there's crossover, and there was a bunch of problems with it that I perceived. So I scrapped it, literally deleted it, so I couldn't reference it when I was doing the next one, and then started it from scratch. And yeah, I think fourth is about right for Pearl for me. I think she's a really great character. She's the glue that holds the team together, which is why she sort of is high on the group dynamic. Again, it's just sheer entertainment value. She lost a couple of points on because these top three are quite close. Top 3 or 4 actually.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is we'll do a rundown from 8 to the revelation of 2, because obviously once we both reveal our second places, it'll be clear who our first places were. So we'll do a refresh then. But what's interesting to me is same last place, and so same 7th place, Bismuth. And then just a Peridot, Pearl, and Lapis, just in a different order. Exactly the same people so far, from 6th to 4th, just in a different order.
I think my third and second are going to be potentially contentious because of I'll tell you now, my third and second drew on points, and I had to go on personal preference.
Okay. Well, I mean, some of us have been accountable for our personal preference all the way along, and not hiding behind numbers.
I would argue that when choosing the numbers, personal preference played a factor. But when it came down to it, when two characters drew, I had to just put the character I preferred number one. That felt like the best way to do it.
Well, my third place, much higher than I expected her to be before doing this list. My third place is Amethyst. Mm-hmm. My third and second really were a surprise to me that they were this high. Amethyst was a surprise because I think in the past I've seen her slightly as the muscle, slightly as the comic relief on occasion, and just the go get 'em character. But I'll tell you what, one of the big reasons Amethyst is this high up is for her recent episode where her growth and emotional maturity to be like, I'm not mad I don't have a horse in the Roses Pink Diamond race. I just want to think of you. I have my feelings about it, but it's more important to me to look after you, Stephen. That episode and that kind of this is where the character's at really held her in good stead because it's hell of an arc. It's an emotional maturity that none of the others showed in that moment. And when thinking on, and it's kind of like, this is again a reason that Pearl's kind of quite low. As much as I love the characters, I started thinking about, well, who do I enjoy watching? Who do I want to see on the screen doing shit? And Amethyst is, I'm not bored when watching Amethyst. I'm not saying I'm bored when watching the others, but sometimes with Lapis, I'm like, oh, stop changing your mind. Sometimes with Pearl, I'm like, oh, there's no need to be so, uptight. But with Amethyst, it's just a bit of a blast. Always, she's always entertaining. She fucking cares about Steven, and actually, although if I was picking, if I was ranking them the way you've done, arc, I'd put Lapis a lot higher. There's a real fight with the Amethyst arc. What she goes through and the idea that she kind of came out late and was small and all of that stuff.
Well, yeah,
really strong.
Think about her stuff with Jasper when she felt like, because Jasper was a similar, cut of gem to her.
Yeah,
she should have been Jasper. Jasper's what she could and should have been if she hadn't come out, in brackets wrong, But as somebody pointed out really cleverly this morning on the Steven Universe subreddit, if every quartz were perfect, we wouldn't have Amethyst. Which is a great way to do it. She came out wrong, and like that for me, as much as her recent maturity was a big factor when I scored her arc, and I'll tell you as a little preview, I scored her arc very highly. She got number 2 for me for arc. She came second for arc. I think I was really focused on the Jasper of it all. Because they did it so perfectly. Because before even Jasper was really a threat, they were setting up her feeling of inadequacy. So you set that up first, and then you put her up against Jasper, who is everything she should be if, all had gone to Homeworld's plan. And she doesn't meet the challenge. She gets beat by Jasper. And how that pushes her dramatically is something really to behold. Like, it's incredible. Like, I can't express enough how well designed that story is. And
it's brilliant.
And then when she finally realizes, yeah, okay, maybe I'm not as strong as Jasper, but like together, because I've got friends. I'm a person who people care for, and I'm like, and we can beat Jasper together, and like accepting that like she doesn't necessarily just need to be strong enough on her own, and it's not about that kind of strength, and like that whole way that all played out was just so pitch perfect. So yeah, so when I came to ranking her arc, at least she came second for me. I won't get to her just yet though.
Well, with that in mind, then who's your third? Dan?
My third is Steven.
For you fucking what? Oh, sorry, what?
So
contentious. Yeah. That's damn right ridiculous, is what that is.
He drew with my second placer, and he got number 1 for group dynamic.
What?
I think he adds the.
What? Hold on! Whoa! Back. He drew with your second placer. This is the one that you had to make a personal preference for.
Yes.
And you put him in third?
Yes.
Right, carry on. Try and defend yourself.
Well, I'll talk about it a little bit more when I actually say my second, if that makes sense, because I can talk about why I chose one over the other. But just to give you an overview of his scoring, he scored really high. In fact, he got number 1 on group dynamic, and he got number 1 on arc. But because I think his arc is the most incredible thing about this show. The growth that character has had, especially since we've been doing these rewatches, is so evident and so subtle and so slow and clever and brilliant that by far the best arc and by far the most important figure in the group dynamic. Where he lost a lot of points was badassery, and he did come lower when it comes to entertainment value to the other characters. Amethyst, Garnet, and Peridot are both, for me, more entertaining to watch than Steven.
I mean, so why if the numbers don't lie, why is heart and warmth and goodness and love not a category for you?
I think I personally relate to the character that was in second more. I acknowledge it's a personal decision.
That's not quite. But do you not think those kind of elements and
they absolutely
those elements
they
represent?
Important? They 100% represent the entire premise of the show. I understand that. Yeah, agreed.
So why is it not a category? Is my question.
Why is it not what, sorry?
Why is it not a category of yours?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I spent an hour and a half designing a thing. I guess I didn't spend. I could have spent more time on it or whatever, and maybe that would have occurred to me.
Dan, I'm just representing my own anger and the audience's anger at you ranking Steven third. Okay. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to his placement on mine, but man, I mean, I think we found a flaw in the spreadsheet system, my friend. Would you have thought Steven would end up third? That's nuts. He's the heart of the show.
Yeah. What can I say? I mean, when I first got the spreadsheet together and I literally clicked sort for it to organize them in order, he was technically second, but it was a drawed score with my second place. So.
Wow. Okay.
And then
right. Well,
and it was not an easy decision to make. I didn't make it lightly, but.
Well, I mean, we'll talk more when I give my Steven placement. So, reminder of my placements so far: 7th, Bismuth; 6th, Peridot; 5th, Pearl; 4, Lapis; 3, Amethyst; and number 2 is Garnet, which means Steven is clearly my number 1. But right now we're talking about number 2. Even Garnet, I would say, is higher than I expected her to be on my list. Because she's just, you kind of just accept Garnet is awesome, and you don't really think about it any more than that. For me, anyway, I appreciate other people have probably a completely different experience, where for them Garnet is everything about the show. Garnet represents what the show is about. Garnet as Ruby and Sapphire is one of the best love stories on television. And I just think she's awesome. And that's why when I did the list, I was like, no, I do have to, even if I don't think, even if the depth of Lapis's arc appeals a bit more, even if she's probably not the character I would pick to watch if I was picking an episode about that character, even if she's not necessarily someone I would put in a pairing with another character, I still think her action, her heart, the power of Ruby and Sapphire, the message, what Garnet represents, what Garnet says to an audience, the impact a character like Garnet could have on younger people, and just from a practical point of view, the way she leads the Crystal Gems, the way she's a force to be reckoned with. I think the first moment of the show, one of the big turning points for me, one of the first moments that I went, oh, this is amazing, and had to go back and rewatch, is her performing Stronger Than You. I think Garnet is awesome. And whilst I was surprised to see her at second, because it almost felt like the obvious choice, I am very pleased that she's second on my list.
Very reasonable.
Yeah.
Very reasonable.
Yeah.
Would you like me to run down and do my second?
Yeah, man.
Okay, so for me, 7th, Bismuth, 6th, Lapis, 5th, Peridot, 4th was Pearl, 3rd, controversially it seems, was Stephen, and 2nd was Amethyst. So,
okay.
Garnet is my number 1. We'll talk about Garnet in a minute, but a lot of the stuff Chris has just said I think is very easily applicable to the person who is the number 1, but we'll talk about that more in detail. So what happened was, I ran through the scores, and I had both Stephen and Amethyst had an average of 3. So I guess you're right in a way, because if I'd done Badassery slightly different, Stephen would have pipped Amethyst and would have been in second. But they came joint. Now, there's a few ways I could have done this. Now, if I could have done it completely mathematically and pragmatically, Amethyst doesn't have a single 1. She came... she didn't have the strongest group dynamic, but she came very high up in entertainment value. For me, second for arc in general, because I thought her arc is incredible next to Stephen's. And she was very high up in Badassery. She was 4th. Her lowest score was a 4th place, whereas Stephen's lowest was 6th for Badassery. I think that's why the scores balanced out, because Stephen had 2 1s, but Amethyst didn't.
Wait, so remind me how it worked again.
In what sense?
With the point system?
So for each category, I ranked them in that category, and they got 7 points, 6 points, 5, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. They got based on their position, and then the person with the lowest score obviously won because they were first the most, or the closest to the bottom the most, based on the average. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the way I thought you did it. Yeah.
So
that's what I thought. But you said something like, I think you said then his average was 3, and it made me think that you did it on like average placements, and I was like, well, surely I think what he said, and the logical way to do it is you give 1 point for the lowest, 7 for the highest. So yeah, cool, right.
Well, actually, no, I reversed it, but yeah, it's a good.
Or the other way round. Yeah.
Which
it
is
doesn't
exactly
matter which
happens.
way you do it, because either the lowest or the highest.
It is an average. It's not a points. It's not a points in the sense of the total. Because if you did it by total, I think it'd be a very different format. Shall I find out what that would be?
Well, that's how I would have done it. So to clarify, what I would have done is ranked them all, and then given 1 point to 7th place, 2 points.
Oh, it's exactly the same. The result is identical.
Well, there you go then.
If you add them as points, Stephen and Amethyst still get 15 exactly.
Yeah, cool.
And Garnet comes first. So the order doesn't shift at all.
So why did you forget the numbers, Dan? Stop hiding behind the numbers, because
point. I want to explain it. I want to explain why they drew first, because that's what categories they did well and failed in. Because some people are going to look at it and say, because what I was getting to before we diverted a little bit there was that Stephen. I could have gone mathematically. Stephen had 2 1s. He came first in both his group dynamic value as in the group and his arc. His arc is the most impressive arc, because the way that character has evolved over time is glorious. One of the best elements of the show. But he's not the most entertaining character of the bunch, and he's certainly not the most badass. Now, some would say maybe you should have weighted badassery lower than arc, entertainment value, or group dynamic, but that's the way it worked.
Or added a heart category.
Or added a heart category, maybe. But then that would have fucked over some. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We'll get to it. And initially I was like, yeah, Steven second, Amethyst third. That makes sense to me. And then I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, because, practically speaking, he actually got some ones. Amethyst's highest score was a 2, but Steven's lowest score was a 6, and Amethyst's lowest score was a 4 on any category. So she had a better, lower general average. So
yeah,
I was like,
on.
so if everything I say is a plus for someone is a negative for the other, and vice versa, there's a reason they averaged out at 3 and 3, because neither of them pipped the other, mathematically speaking. So then I was like, so what the fuck do I do then? What's my situation here? Which is how do I actually draw?
I mean, you went deep on getting obsessed with the numbers then.
Yeah.
We've learned.
So then I basically go, no, let's pull out a minute. Let's do the opposite of that. That's how we've figured it out so far. And the numbers initially were assigned by personal preference. Keep in mind, the numbers didn't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
I didn't roll the dice, so it was all personal preference. But when it came down to it, I had two characters that were there, and I was like, well, what's the defining factor? What's the difference between these two? Because it just didn't feel right when I saw Steven in second, compared to Amethyst. Then I just thought, well, I think the issue is that. And I've always said she's the most relatable character. I think that those feelings of I'm never going to be the chosen one. You know what I mean? Steven has all this pressure put on him, and the reason his story is so good is because he's basically a child forced to endure all this pressure. But that's not relatable to me in the same way that Amethyst's feeling of inadequacy to everyone and everything around her, which is just so much more human. And again, relatable compared to what Steven's going through. So in the end, it just came down to relatability for me. I've always said that Amethyst was the character I relate to most, and therefore arguably one of my favorite gems, if not my favorite. There's a lump of Amethyst on my desk. I think that practically speaking, of the two, it felt more true to myself and my personal preference to put Amethyst ahead of Steven for that very reason.
Can't argue with personal preference at the end of the day. I would like to ask if it's about, you're never going to be the chosen one, and it's about personally relating, are we going to at some point rank the Harry Potter characters and you put Ron above Harry?
No, because I don't particularly... maybe, because Ron's is Amethyst's story, isn't it?
Essentially.
Yeah.
No, you know what? I think it's weird because I got all mock angry. And actually, I can't because sometimes personal, you can't really argue with personal preference. And, we've not recorded this week's MBS yet, but I feel like I'll be arguing a lot for my personal preference on some of the shows we've got to talk about. So it would be, it would set a bad precedent for that conversation for me to not allow personal preference here. I think if you relate more with Amethyst and you... for all the reasons you've just listed, then that's absolutely fair enough. And whilst surprising, I accept your reasoning.
But strictly speaking, if I was doing it by sports rules, when two teams draw in a league table, it usually goes down to most wins. So in football in the UK, in the Premier League, if the two teams at the top have the same score, the team with the most wins, I think, or the most... It's either the most wins or the most goals goes forward. And then in Formula 1, it's the same thing. If two people are drawing, the person with the actual most Grand Prix, number one finishes actually goes through. Strictly speaking, then if you were doing it that way, Steven would be second. And for a while he was. But anyway. So yeah, that's why. So with that being said, Chris, Steven number one for you.
Yeah, Steven's number one. For me, like I say, he's the heart of the show. He's the character, the warmth, and I love the message of love should win out, and so much of this show is Steven making the right decision and making the right decision based on love. It's often him making the brave decision because of that. It's often him doing something just to his own detriment just for that. I think those are great attributes. I think his arc has been brilliant. I think there are moments where he really is badass. The shield and, producing the sword in some of those fights have been epic. And I think the depths to him, the mental health side of the story and the pressures that are upon this child make him incredibly engaging and interesting to watch. And for me, he's the heart of the show. And that's how he
out of curiosity, would you have accepted second? Would you have been less? Would you have found that less egregious?
What if you'd put him second?
Mm-hmm.
I thought. Well, I mean, clearly, Garnet and Steven are my first and second. So I would have potentially. I think Garnet would have been logically a less contentious argument than. So I could understand Garnet alone beating him
because it's funny.
But you've outlined. Like I say, you've outlined.
Oh, I was
your
just
personal reasons.
I was
and
just
I can't
curious,
argue
though.
with them.
You've
won me round.
I was just curious. The other funny thing is, you actually called it really early on, because when I talked about Bismuth's badassery, you're right. If I'd have switched Bismuth and Steven's scores around on badassery, then that would have put Steven in second, unquestionably, on points. Yeah,
no, but I think your argument was great, and I think actually, is what's funny is you've done it the more numbers logic based way, but actually what you've come down to arguing is an incredibly personal preference.
But that's why I think this was so interesting to me, because I thought it was that's why I did that, because I could have carried on with my numbers approach, and like I said, had done the sports thing of just going, well, Steven has more number one, so he stays in two. But in the end, it just didn't sit right with me. And I'm glad that I had the freedom to do that, because, had Steven come points-wise higher, then there wouldn't have been a choice in it. The numbers don't lie, as I've been saying. Because they drew, it gave me the opportunity to make an actual, to have a hand in it. Should we quickly talk about then?
Garnet being number one for you.
Yeah, I think it's just, I think Garnet is so important to the show. I think she's really important to the group dynamic, because she's one of the characters that's very reserved and calm and stuff. And I think she's one of the funniest characters without realizing it often. Hi, this is Mum Universe. They're fine. They're playing with swords. I don't know. Her dry sort of approach often leads to really entertaining moments. She is the number one badass on the show. And while her arc was actually weirdly the thing I ranked of her scores, arc is where she came lowest. She came fourth in arc, and the reason she came fourth in arc is because while the development of Ruby and Sapphire's relationship has been incredible, and obviously better than a couple of the other characters' arcs, it's not as meaty. They were in love, and eventually they got married, which is beautiful. Go on.
I actually think it is as meaty. Do you know what I think it is? It all took place before the show started.
Well, that's
exactly.
We've
seen it in flashbacks.
100%. So from the show's context, though, it hasn't developed it's a very important story to the show, but her character is the sort of stable rock by which all the drama rotates around. Normally, occasionally they do throw her into turmoil, but I kept thinking, and I kept thinking about how good a character they have developed here in terms of how she represents. So Steven is very much represents love. You talked about that a lot, and how every action he makes is to do with love and giving everyone a chance and appreciating everyone and all that stuff. But Garnet literally is the physical embodiment of that concept. And I think when you combine that with her entertainment value, the way she works in the group, how badass she is, and the fact her arc is still pretty incredible, even if it isn't the best arc, it's just hard to dispute. Like I said, there were a few different iterations of this scoring system. She never came anything but first for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, definitely.
And it's really interesting. It's because I think she's just I think when it comes to being an all rounder, she's strong in every category. It's hard to, and also I think one of the biggest core messages of the whole show is I think, forgetting the love and the relationship side of it as well, also the idea of acceptance and not giving a flying fuck what anyone thinks about you, and you just being you. She represents not just, I know it's been used in the past as an analogy for homosexuality or but I think it represents anyone who's in a societally sort of minority, like a minority in the sense of societally slightly outcast. There are sections of society, that tragically have an issue with gay people, and there's a section of society that tragically have an issue with people of a different colour skin than them, and there's a section of society you don't like this person or that person or whatever. And Garnet represents a person who is, in spite of a society that wouldn't accept her, someone who is just going with it anyway. And like, because she's gonna be herself, because, you know, fuck you, like, you don't get to judge her, you know, and she's gonna be stronger for it. And you look at Stronger Than You as sort of the anthem for the show in a lot of ways. And I think that the Garnet represents a relationship that's not just a statement on love, but also a statement on like being okay with who you are and not really caring about the bigots of the world. And I think that's a really important message. And I think what she represents to people out there who experience bigotry, I think is really important. And I think it's really important for kids as well. I think it's really important that kids see a character like Garnet who is that confident in herself. I think it's valuable. So yeah, to me, Garnet came number one, no matter how I scored it.
Well, it's funny because if you scored us, Garnet would be our mutual number one, because obviously I had Stephen in second, but you had him in third, and vice versa with Amethyst. So, yeah, Garnet is incredibly important to the show, and yeah, I don't disagree with anything you've just said.
Yeah.
There
Cool.
we go. I'd love to see some more lists. So
yeah,
we've not counted Connie. So
presumably my points card I've put up on the screen at some point in this. I might as well, so you can see all the rankings and how I worked it out.
Well, put it up, Dan. Now, there you go.
Yes.
Go to the screen now. You can see the point card.
But that's the full card there in front of you right now. And
So
if you're listening on iTunes or whatever, flick to the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/NothingButStaticUK. Click on the video for this episode and skip to this time code that wherever you will listen. The time code of where you're listening to now, it should roughly be around there, and you can have a look at how I scored everyone.
Just to clarify, for people ranking below, the characters you've got to play with by our definition are Lapis, Peridot, Bismuth, Pearl, Garnet, Amethyst, Stephen. Those are the characters to rank them below. One final reminder, my list: Bismuth, Peridot, Pearl, Lapis, Amethyst, Garnet, Stephen. Dan's list:
Bismuth, Lapis, Peridot, Pearl, Stephen, Amethyst, Garnet.
And let us know yours below.
Yeah, and if you don't want to do your full ranking, by the way, feel free to just point out where you didn't like what we did. Like, I don't mind if someone just goes, I'd have switched around this character because I think of this. That's fine as well. I don't want people to feel compelled to spend hours putting together one like we did. I found it really difficult. As a little summary, like, there's not much in it. These are all such good characters. And doing this as an experiment, I'm kind of glad we did it now, because when I sat down to do this, I realized how much there is to love about each of these characters. Like, the fact that a character as awesome and complex as Lapis could be 6th on this list is nuts to me. Like, the initial joke about this is when you suggested it, and we talked about it on here, you went, well, Peridot wouldn't be that high for me. I went, you're a lunatic. You're a crazy man. She's 5th on my list. 5th. Because I just couldn't justify putting it high, because the standards are so high. It's a ridiculous competition. Like, it's insane. Like, these characters are so good and so well written and so well developed, and they've all got something to give. It's only when comparing them to each other that you start finding who is slightly stronger in certain areas, that you start coming up with a design, like a thing like this. And it's so absurdly close that we can have situations where someone who's first on your list is 3rd on mine or whatever. Like, I think that's indicative again of how well this show is written. So I just wanted to lay it out.
it was so much harder than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I agree.
To do so. Fair play. Cheeseburger Backpack rewatch next week, isn't it? To determine whether it is the ideal starting point after it appeared throughout the Flood Order as the recommended first episode, and as a few other people said that, we think we're going to give it a rewatch.
And it was technically the first. It was the first physically produced as well, which I think that was the real point that I was like, oh shit, maybe we really should consider that, because they made it first, which I didn't know until, or if I did, I'd forgotten until more recently. So I think that it forced us to consider something we didn't necessarily consider when we first looked at the show.
Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting one next week. So we'll see you then.
Yeah, so we'll see you guys next week for that. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And we'll see you next time as we revisit Cheeseburger Backpack. cheeseburger backpack,
Cheeseburger backpack. Cheeseburger backpack.